Good day everyone, this is Ilya from Plumsail, and in this video I'll explain how to customize the toolbar behavior of our SharePoint forms using none other than Plumsail Forms for SharePoint. We will be adding new toolbar buttons to the form, removing the old ones, changing the form's redirect properties, and even creating new user scenarios like save and stay or save current form data as a new item. There will be a lot of coding in this video naturally, so if you're not familiar with JavaScript, I highly recommend watching our JavaScript tutorial here. If you are familiar though, let's get customizing. The first useful customization I'd like to share is adding a button to the toolbar. Plumsail Forms stores all buttons as an array of objects, basically a numbered list. We can address these buttons by their index, but remember that they start from zeros, so the first button is 0, the second is 1, the third is 2, and so on and so forth. Let's get this save button. We can first get the Forms Manager, it's FD, then get the toolbar from it, and then get the array of buttons from the toolbar. Then we can use the square brackets to specify which exact button do we need, and we need the first button, so the index is 0. Then we can access any properties of the button, for example, its text. Let's see, and it's safe. We're good. We can also remove buttons from the list using the splice function. Let's delete the close button. Inside the round brackets of a splice function, we need to specify the first item to remove and how many of them to remove. The close button is second in the toolbar, so its index is 1. We only need to delete one button, so the second parameter is also 1. Now let's head to the Forms Designer and finally try adding a button to the toolbar. We can put all the same commands here in the designer as in the console, but there's a small caveat. When we write the code in the console, it's executed right away, basically as we type it, but in the designer we need to specify a form event that will trigger the execution of the code. This is done to let the form know when to use our code, for example, when it's first opened or when it's submitted. I'll use the rendered event for our current use case because we need to configure the toolbar as soon as the form is shown to the user. Let's make a variable to store the button while we work on it. And now we can add some curly brackets and start assembling the button property by property, starting with its display text. Let's add an icon to the button. You can leave this property out, then it will be just text. You can find a library of all available icons on the Microsoft Developer Portal. Just find the one you like and copy its name into your code. The location property defines on which side of the toolbar the button will be displayed, and if it's 0, then the button will be on the left. If it's 1, then on the right. If it's anything else, then we're gonna have a problem and the location will default to 0. The class property can be used to apply a predefined set of CSS styles to the button. This is the recommended way to customize its look. BTN primary gives you a filled button, and BTN outlined primary gives you just an outline. Let's try the second option. Finally, let's configure the most important property, click. This is the code that will be executed after the button is clicked, and we can pretty much put anything inside. For example, fd close or fd save to manipulate the state of a form. For now, we'll just apply some pre-filled values to the form fields. Let's add the newly created button to the toolbar. We can use the same splice function we used to remove buttons, but this time the second parameter should be 0, since we don't want to remove any items. After the second parameter, we can specify any amount of elements to add. Let's make an example and add the button we just made twice. This will insert the items into the end of the array. Let's check out the buttons we've made. Open a new form for this list, and here they are. These two buttons work completely the same, even though they have different IDs and different indexes in the array, because they have the same code and the same styling. Note that all of these properties can be changed dynamically as the form is being filled in. Here's a little example form I made to showcase the different properties. First, let's try changing the button's text. That's easy. Then we can disable and enable it. And if it's disabled, it's grayed out and unresponsive. We cannot interact with it. Visible is a different property. It completely hides the button. And note that visible and disabled are completely independent. We can also change the icon of a button at runtime, and if you're tired of always having an icon, then just apply null to this property so that it clears out. The location, as I said, can be either 1 or 0, and if it's anything else, then it's not gonna work out. The style property is one of the most interesting and versatile of the bunch. We can use it to change the button's color, to change its font family, to give it rounded corners, or any other CSS style. Let's completely rehaul the look of this button, give it a little pill shape. And now we can change its font to be a monospace. Now we can give the button a bigger font size and a little margin so it has some space around it. Let's check this out. With CSS styling, sky's the limit, but you don't always need that many possibilities, so sometimes, and most times, it's much quicker to apply a class to the button. After the form is submitted, the user is automatically redirected back to the list page. This might not be ideal, for example, if they want to keep adding items to the list. Let's redirect them back to the new form. We will use the saved event because the code has to trigger once the form is, you guessed it, saved. This event allows us to redirect the user to any page by setting up a redirect URL. But to create that URL, we'll need a link to the site and the list ID. To get the URL, open your form in browser and copy its web address up to the quotation mark. Getting list ID is also easy. Just use fd spformctx listattributes.id in your code. Now let's assemble the link. Paste the URL between the quotation marks and add page type and list ID. Page type is 8 for a new form, 6 for an edit form, and 2 for display form. Note that everything inside the quotation marks is treated like text, so list ID has to be outside to be treated as a variable. Make sure not to forget to declare the result variable like I just did. This would completely break the program. You can find this example and many more like it in our documentation. All links are in the description. Let's test the form. I'll open it and create a new item with some sample data in its only field. Now when we save the form, we're not translated to the list page. We happen to be on the display form. What a miracle! Let's do some more. One small note, if your form is using the panel mode instead of full screen mode, you can use the result keep panel opened equals true to keep the form open on the same page. This doesn't really work with full screen forms, but the good thing is that you can add both code samples to the same function, so that whether you change your form mode to full screen or to tab, it always works as expected. We can also add the redirecting code to a button instead of a form event. In that case, it will be executed upon button click. Let's try using a value from the form for this example, just to demonstrate that the link doesn't necessarily have to point to a SharePoint page. We will use window.location.href, and this is an alternative redirect method that uses raw JavaScript instead of Plumsail API. It's generally better to use the result.redirect URL property, but we don't have much of a choice in this case. This use case is useful if you're making a complex system like a CRM with a lot of redirects to different pages. If you're not, better use the ESP saved event. Let's open SharePoint and check out the result. We'll open the edit form for this item, and you can see the text is filled in, and we get on the forms page. Now let's open a different item. This one has a documents link in its text. And we get to the document page. Everything works as it should. Sometimes redirecting the user can be tricky. For example, let's redirect them to a new, edit or display form depending on the state of the choice field. Right out of the gate we have a problem. The form values are not accessible in the SP saved event. We need to read them in the SP before save and keep them in a variable to read later on. Now we can use this value to build the redirect links. Just like before, we'll need the site address, the list ID and the item ID we can get from the result variable. Let's go ahead and construct the 3 links for each of the 3 choice values. I'm using a switch statement here, which might look a bit confusing, but is actually very simple. It accepts one variable in the round brackets and completes one case statement based on its value. Here, if redirect is set to new, the first statement activates, and the URL variable is assigned the link to the new form. The same happens for our possible values. Now let's combine the toolbar customization and redirect customization. I'll skip the creation of a new button to focus on the redirect logic, because this is where it gets tricky. Before anything happens, we need to set up a boolean flag to keep track of which button was used to save a form, the standard one or the custom one. In the button's click property, let's set up this flag to true and submit. Now we can read the flag in the SP saved event and decide if we need to redirect the user to the edit form. Redirecting should work differently for new and edit forms. We've configured the new form, now let's modify the edit one. The switch is in the top right corner of the designer. The code is essentially the same, but we can keep the form open by specifying null as the redirect URL. Also note that since the form is not reloaded in this case, you have to manually reset the save and stay flag. Now let's open the form and test it out. When I click the Save and Stay button, the form is saved but not closed, no matter if I'm on the new form or edit form. We've managed to save an item and keep editing it. Now let's try saving a copy. We can use the PNP.js library to directly access the SharePoint list from our JavaScript code and create a new item without closing the form. I've already explained how to set up a button and redirect the user, so this time I'll focus on the PNP call. First, I'll save each value of a form to a variable. We'll need that later. Let's get the current list from SharePoint by calling sp web lists get by ID. This function takes the list ID as an argument and returns a list from which we can get an array of items. Finally, let's use the add method to append a new JSON object to the end of the list. Let's check out the form. I'll input some sample data, then click the copy button. And now I can modify the data again and save the form. Look, both the item and the copy are successfully saved to the list. Let's create a toolbar button that would run a Power Automate flow. We'll start with a simpler example where the flow runs on form submission and build up from there. First, we will need the form ID. It is found in the Power Automate section of the form settings. I will just go ahead and copy it and then start creating the flow. The name can be anything. I will name it basically what it is, and the trigger has to be the form is submitted trigger from Plumsail. Second, here it is. Now we need to configure the trigger, and first things first, let's make sure that our Plumsail connection is okay. You will be prompted to log into your Plumsail account here. Then pick Other and paste the form ID into this input box. Okay, so far we're doing great. Now we need to pass the form data. Since it comes in JSON format, we need the pass JSON action to get it into something more useful. Here, get the JSON scheme from the same menu as the form ID and paste it in the action. Lastly, let's display a Teams message on the screen so that we know that everything runs properly. Let's test the form. I will create a new item on the list and add some sample data to the title field because we reference it in our Teams message. Now I need to save the form and wait a bit for the message. It should appear right about now. Here it is, and the information is correct. Everything works stellar. Now let's create a flow that will be triggered by a webhook. First, we need an instant cloud flow instead of an automated cloud flow, and the trigger will be when an HTTP request is received. In the body of the trigger, we need to paste our JSON scheme and set this to anyone so that we don't have to figure out the authorization. I will go ahead and copy here an Teams action from the previous flow, and so that we know that the flow successfully executed. Now after we save the flow, we can get the webhook link from the trigger, and now we can use this link to create our HTTP request. First we need an request object to store it. Then we can start configuring. We need to specify the method. In this case it's post, the redirect link, then true. And we also need to specify what kind of data we will be sending. In our case it's a JSON object, so content type will be application JSON. Now we need to send the request, and the data we will take from the form manager. We will use the JSON stringify function and fd data function. Let's test what we've got, and I will enter some sample data just like before, but now the form is not submitted and the message still appears. There it is. Very nice. There are many more examples of what can be done with Plumsail Forms and JavaScript. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our community via the link below or subscribe to this channel to get notified when we release new tutorials. If you have any problems or questions while following this tutorial, feel free to ask in our community. Happy automation!